was our 30 seconds to get everybody here to join us today. And I wanted to say good afternoon or morning, depending on where you're joining us from. I'm thrilled to welcome you to today's webinar. My name is Sarah Peterson. I'm a product marketing manager here at Normative. And today I have the role of your host. So our webinar today is going to be all about reduction, and we have a packed agenda for you folks. Before we get into that, a little bit of housekeeping. So the webinar today is set to be 45 minutes. It will be recorded, so look for that in your inbox after today's session. We'll be doing a live Q&A at the end of the session, pending our time, so please submit your questions using the Q&A feature within our Livestorm platform, so down at the bottom. If you don't manage to get to your question in the time today, one of our climate experts here at Normative will be back in touch with you via email after the webinar. And last but not least, we're always striving to create webinars and other content that are truly useful for you. So after the webinar, we'll send a quick 1-minute survey. Please take your time. Your feedback is super helpful to us, and share anything you have about today's webinar, and thank you in advance. So today's speakers, I'm excited. I'll be sharing the stage with some amazing experts. First up is a fellow Normative team member, Tristan.
Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you. I'm a product manager here at Normative. I've been here for about 3 years. For the first 2 of those years, I was working in the climate strategy team along with Delphine. And now I'm supporting our customers within a team building reduction features.
Thank you, Tristan. We are also joined by my brilliant colleague, Delphine.
Hello, everyone. My name is Delphine. As Tristan mentioned, I'm a climate strategy advisor at Normative, which essentially means that I support our customers on their net zero journey.
Amazing. And last but certainly not least, I want to extend a very special warm welcome to our customer guest speaker today, Grzegorz from the industry-leading NORCAN.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me for this interview, for this presentation. I'm just working with one of companies with Normative. I'm just representing NORCAN Group, and I'm just championing the sustainability topic within the group on the corporate level. Thank you.
Thanks again to all of our speakers. And at the top of the webinar, I promised you a pack agenda. So Tristan will start us off with why we cannot wait when it comes to action and real reduction. Following up, Delphine will share her expertise on how organizations can break down the monumental task of reduction into 3 easy steps. Grzegorz will showcase how the NORCAN Group has approached reduction and positioned themselves as an industry leader. And then Tristan will be giving us an exclusive first look at some exciting features his team has been working on. With the time that we'll have left, we will have a Q&A session with this panel, so you'll get to pick the brain of these experts, but remember to ask the questions in the bottom right hand in the questions tab and not the chat so they don't get lost. That's enough from me. Like I said, we got a packed agenda, so let's get started. Over to you, Tristan.
Cool. Thank you so much. Real reduction. Why now? Well, the fact is, globally, we are behind on emission reduction. Now, we're not as far behind as we were a few years ago. There is some very promising modeling coming from the International Energy Agency that estimates we could see a peak in global emissions from energy generation next year, 2025. Ember, another example, a leading energy think tank, in their 2024 electricity review, is pushing the idea that we most likely saw the peak already in 2023, at least from electricity generation. And we will, for the first time, bar COVID, see a decline in 2024. But we are still behind. And we're behind because we still need to unravel about 170 years of expansion in fossil fuel-based energy generation, which, according to Ember, grew by 0.8% in 2023. And I came across 3 values whilst I was preparing for this that I wanted to share, because for me, they felt like a stark reminder of what we're working towards, or rather, what we're working to avoid. 7,000, 25%, and 99%. There are 7,000 species of fish, plants, invertebrates, marine mammals, sea turtles, and birds that live in and around coral reefs. That represents approximately 25% of known ocean biodiversity. In a 2-degree warming scenario, we may lose up to 99% of coral reefs. With current climate policies, we are on track for 2.7 degrees of warming by the end of the century, which for me is a pretty sobering thought. But a decade ago, climate scientists were warning of 4 degrees of warming based on 2013 climate policies. Now we're at 2.7, and that gives me a bit of hope that with a lot of hard work and a huge amount of luck, we may be able to shave off another 1.3 degrees over the next decade. And I hope that all of us sitting here will play a small role in that. But to do it, we need to drive real year-on-year emission reduction. Now, Delphine will, in a moment, get into the finer details of how to plan reduction, but I want to give you a bit of insight into how we are thinking about emission reduction from a product perspective at Normative. And it's all about answering questions. The first two of those questions are how much to reduce and when to do it by. This is ultimately captured in setting a target. What level of reduction am I striving for, and when do I need to achieve it by? Then we need to answer the question of how could emissions be reduced? And this is of course not one, but many questions. And the way that we're thinking about this comes down to the idea of control. Organizations have different levels of control over the different activities that contribute to their emissions inventory. Scope 1 and 2, business travel, transportation. These are spheres in which businesses can make decisions to potentially change what they do today for lower emission alternatives. But for many organizations, the vast majority of organizations, in fact, many emission sources lie outside of their direct decision-making control in their value chains, both upstream and downstream. Now, upstream is somewhat easier to address, as mentioned before. One can change their travel modes, transportation modes. But the fact is, there may be certain products, services, suppliers, and most certainly customers that a business cannot change. And in this regard, we believe organizations need to plan reduction using data directly from their suppliers or customers. This starts with the targets that your value chain is setting. We're working to enable organizations to see what their emissions will be in the future, taking into account the targets set by their suppliers and customers. And I will show you this in a little while. And then in our questioning, we move from how could emissions be reduced to how can emissions be reduced? How are we actually going to do this? And this comes down to an evaluation and building an understanding of cost, the expertise required, availability and efficiency of changes. And I want to dig into this a little bit further, because the truth is it's not going to be easy and it's not going to be cheap. But as some of you might know already, the cost of your organization's carbon impact is cheaper now than it will be in the future. So let's talk about money. With the introduction of progressively more ambitious taxation between CBAM and the EU ETS, legislators are putting a price on climate externalities. This starts off at 85 euros per ton in 2026, but it's expected to climb to between 100 and 150 euros per ton by the end of the decade, with more and more imports subject to the CBAM. The second component of cost comes from recent research and indicates that the socio-economic cost of climate change could be 6 times higher than previously anticipated. This paper I reference, which is not yet peer-reviewed, suggests that temperature shocks from climate change will lead to a surge in extreme climatic events, resulting not only in GDP loss, but a 31% decline in well-being. This decline in well-being has been compared to the socio-economic losses associated with fighting a domestic war. Now, that is a tad too much doom and gloom, even for me, so I want to finish this up on a more positive note. I mentioned at the top of this presentation that a decade ago, climate scientists were warning of 4 degrees of warming, and now we're at 2.7. In the last 3 months, I've had the pleasure to hear from about 20 of our customers, both directly and indirectly, on the topic of emission reduction. And it seems to me that we are at the precipice of immense action. We've spoken to construction companies, universities, software consultancies, and manufacturers, all now with a few years of consistent emissions calculations under their belt, all poised to set ambitious reduction targets and make decisive interventions to reduce their emissions. And knowing this and experiencing this and seeing this makes me incredibly excited to continue working in this space. And together with the rest of the team at Normative, support them, our customers, with their emission reduction journeys. To round up, the moral imperative speaks for itself. Look at the beautiful coral. It is but a canary in a coal mine. The financial imperative is coalescing in front of our eyes. We are behind, but what can we do in the next decade? Thank you.
It's really amazing stuff. I don't think the urgency is a surprise to anyone on this call, but thank you, Tristan, providing some great context as to why organizations need to get started on this today. But how do you do just that? Delphine has vast expertise in helping different types of orgs on their net zero journey, and some of which she's going to share with us today.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So following from this great introduction to the topic by Tristan, I will take you through the various steps and aspects to consider in order to reduce your business's carbon emissions. So the fundamental first step towards reducing carbon emissions is, of course, to quantify the impact of your business activities as they are today, to build a comprehensive and accurate carbon baseline, as we call it. So why is this necessary? Because you can only measure and plan reduction when you have a starting point to compare your reduction plan and initiatives against. And to quantify the impact of your business activities requires collecting data and assessing emissions not only from within your organization to measure your scope 1 and 2, but also from your value chain, the business activities that fall in scope 3. So as you probably know, the value chain encompasses all upstream and downstream activities, all the way from the moment you purchase raw materials until how your products that have been sold are disposed of by your consumers. And that makes data collection particularly challenging because they happen in areas where you don't always have visibility as a business. And this is why, as a business, you need to engage with your value chain to be able to set an accurate baseline by collecting information from your suppliers and service providers on their emissions, their reduction targets, and their mitigation plan. This is so you can capture their pre-existing plans within your baseline. Now, step 2. Let's say that you have engaged with your suppliers, you have a comprehensive carbon baseline. The next step will be to define your reduction ambitions in the form of what we call reduction targets. These targets are essentially the goalposts your organization will set for itself. Now, logically, it's important that your targets are aligned with climate science. We at Normative would do everything we could to give you the confidence to set ambitious targets in line with the 1.5 degree warming scenario. Now, there is a variety of different targets that your organization could set that you can see on the slide. So renewable electricity targets, intensity targets, engagement targets. You can set targets internally, or you can commit to them externally by joining initiatives such as the SBTi, RE100, or even the UN Race to Zero campaign. And you can join us next month at our webinar on target setting for much more information on this quite extensive topic. Now, let's jump into these different ways to reduce emissions and to track reduction. The first element to think about is that reduction can be active or passive. It is active when you, yourself, your organization makes changes that drive a reduction in emissions in a particular activity that you have. It's passive when reduction occurs as a result of changes in the markets that you operate in. So concretely, what does that mean? Active reduction would be moving, for example, from air transport to sea freight, as it will allow you to reduce emissions from transportation. Passive reduction will occur from the greening of energy grids in locations where you operate, or potentially from your suppliers having already defined mitigation measures that in turn will reduce your scope 3 emissions. When you develop your reduction plan, you'll develop what we call a variety of reduction initiatives. These initiatives are active changes that will drive reduction in business activities that are leading to hotspots in your emissions. And these changes usually follow 2 approaches. So it's either efficiency or substitution. Efficiency means achieving the same business outcome, but using fewer resources. So for example, you could be producing the same product, but with less material. Or substitution means reducing your business's emissions by changing from high emitting activities to lower carbon options. So changing types of materials, changing suppliers, or even changing technology, for example. So the example I explained about moving towards sea freight is an example of substitution. Now, you don't need to apply these approaches separately. They can be applied separately, but they can also be combined. For example, if you're a car manufacturer, you might be able to reduce the energy consumption required to produce one vehicle, and at the same time, you might be able to transition towards the use of renewable electricity. And when you develop these various reduction initiatives, you want to calculate the reduction potential. So what that means is looking at what are the current emissions from the activity you have as it stands, and what will be the emissions once you have enacted on the change or on that reduction initiatives. And once you have seen what the reduction potential is for a reduction initiative, you can see whether it'll help you in meeting or reaching your set targets. Now, I'm sure that we all wish that when we were developing reduction initiatives, we would only look at the reduction potential. But as you know, there's many other factors and considerations that you need to take into account. You want to consider the feasibility of implementing these reduction initiatives or these changes by identifying other factors like cost, the availability of resources or technology required, and for example, the operational feasibility of the change. Looking at all these factors, of course, requires time, it requires resources, but mainly it requires the right kind of people. And this is why when we at Normative talk about reduction, we often emphasize the importance of collaboration from all levels of the business. It's important to have a unified approach across departments when we're talking about reduction. It's crucial for leadership to put emphasis on the importance of these projects, of these reduction initiatives, of setting up these plans. And there is usually key teams that will be driving these kinds of changes, like product design, logistics, procurement, of course, finance. And these are the departments that will drive the adoption of these reduction initiatives. So as part of our net zero journey at Normative, we held reduction workshops together with our customers, and we helped them in brainstorming potential reduction initiatives. And what I found is that reduction plans are always more actionable, more impactful, and more achievable when various teams join these sessions and they're involved all together so that they can evaluate all these factors together. So when I was hosting one of these workshops, we were discussing reduction initiatives for transportation. And it was great to see how when you put the product team together with the logistics team, the product team was discussing the types of packaging that they can choose. And together with the logistics team, they were looking at what are high emitting routes in their product journey and how can they reduce packaging and weight in these different parts of that journey. And it's through these types of sessions that you can come to finalize reduction initiatives where all the factors and considerations have been scrutinized and discussed. Now, planning reduction is not only a collaborative process internally, but also externally. When you're working to reduce emissions in areas where, as Tristan mentioned, you have less degrees of control. This is because you need to plan your reduction based on your suppliers, on your customers' reduction plans. And in the same way, this can be passive or active. Passive if your suppliers and your customers have already set targets and mitigation plans that are in place. And you want to be, in that case, you want to be able to forecast how their plan will tie into yours. While active is if you have suppliers that have not begun or are not yet ambitious enough in their climate action, where you can either support them or in the worst case scenario, you can plan to use alternative suppliers that will allow you to reach your targets. So reduction in your value chain really requires building long-term partnerships with your suppliers so that you can together reach your targets. So all in all, what are the key steps to reduction? So you need to have an accurate baseline against which to compare your reductions so that you know what you can do to reduce. You need to define where you are going in the form of reduction targets so that you know what is your goal. And you need to collaborate internally and externally to develop a variety of reduction initiatives that will allow you to reach that goal. Thank you.
Wow, what a great way to break it down. Thanks, Delphine. But again, if you have any questions, make sure you ask in the question box and you'll be able to get Delphine's feedback live at the end of the session. And now, while we have talked about what reduction looks like in theory, I'm thrilled to have someone who's walking the walk and championing reduction. So please give a warm welcome to our customer speaker from Norcan, Greg Horsch.
Thank you, Sarah. Let me start with the introduction of a Norcan. Norcan Group offers end-to-end solutions for metal casting industry, from melting to surface preparations. We have 6 leading brands: DISA, Italpresse Gauss, Simpson, Strico Westhoffen, Willebrator, and Monetizer. We are production technology group with well-established technologies, and our history is rooted back for more than 100 years for some of those brands. When you're driving your car, there is a very good chance that the parts which has been included in your car has been manufactured on our machines. When you have your kitchenware, there is some of high-end equipment which is made on our machines. So we are, I would say, in every step of your life. Why we committed to sustainability and started this journey? It's rooted in our vision. We simply want to leave the planet in a better condition than we inherited in it. So this is stated directly in our vision. So we want to find smarter, less wasteful, less energyful ways of producing parts. We want to make sure that we are supporting sustainability, and we will safeguard our planet for our future generations. We want to have a good health and working conditions. And we want to cooperate and support the communities we live in, working or operating in. And it's just not because it's a corporate mumbo jumbo, but it's because it's the right thing to do. And that's why we, in 2001, we committed, to science-based target. In 2003, we got our targets validated, and we are just on the way to achieving them. What does it mean? Achieving the targets. I would like just to tell you about a few strategic directions, which seems to be a kind of a rational perspective. We have 3 scopes, typically. Scope 1, direct emissions. Scope 2, energy consumption. Scope 3, that's downstream and upstream emissions. And there is something else to this, which we developed. It's calling Scope 4, internal disclosures. So for Scope 1, we want to reduce, the emissions, which are coming from our factories. That is predominantly reducing the natural gas consumption. We want to convert to electrical vehicles, and that's a kind of a policy statement for transportation. For Scope 2, we are, first of all, interested in reducing energy consumptions in our locations. And then, whenever possible, just to get a green electricity sourcing. It seems obvious and natural. However, we are a global player. Our locations, our factories are located across the globe in US, China, India, Europe. And it's not everywhere that you can get green electricity sourcing at that stage. So there is a challenge which we're trying to overcome, and we are on the good way to get our targets achieved. Scope 3, everyone is just thinking about reducing emissions, getting lower emissions from our suppliers and customers. But the key challenge is the data. The data which we are able to get about our suppliers, about our customers, is fragmented, not trusted. So that's why we decided to get the engagement targets and engage with our customers and suppliers into discussions, into the data discovery, allowing them to prepare and work on their targets and commit to energy reduction objectives. And meantime, also get the feedback from them and get the high quality of the data. So we are working with our customers on their commitments, on their data for different parts, technologies they are just working with. We are working systematically with our suppliers, starting with our supply policy, which has been updated, for commitment to sustainability. And also we include, some requirements for supply qualifications, just to make sure that we are taking this perspective as well. It's not only cost or logistic perspective. And at the end, we also engage in activities which are benefiting our customers, but we cannot credit them to our initiatives or our reduction of targets. For example, energy recuperation on our equipment is not benefiting directly us, but it's benefiting our customers because they are spending less energy on powering up our machines. And that makes a lot of sense. And we would like to learn this and to use it, for the future discussions with our customers. And that's why we are reporting this in our system, in the customer relationship management system, which we have in place. Thank you very much for this short presentation, and thank you.
Wow, it's been amazing to see what a huge initiative NORCAN has taken on behalf of their family of brands and been able to sum it up in one slide. If you have questions for Greg Orsh and the work they're doing, please put it in the questions tab. You heard Delphine talk about what monumental task reduction is, but Tristan and his team are well understanding of the imperative that we have to do that. And then because of that, on the back of the work they've been doing, they're excited to give you an exclusive first look at what they've been building to help enterprises like NORCAN reach their net zero targets. So I'm going to hand it back over to Tristan.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. I will take over the share. Let's see. There we go. Wonderful. So this is our new-ish scenarios feature where you can model emission reduction initiatives over time. I've already set this up. So this scenario is focused on travel, transport, and energy. But first, I want to call your attention to the targets that we have in place here. So we have a 2030 target and a 2050 target. And in this case, the level of ambition is in line with a 1.5 degree warming scenario. And that varies slightly between the two scopes for the 2030 target, but is a 90% reduction in emissions by 2050 for all three scopes. So in this scenario, I've preloaded a number of substitution-focused initiatives and efficiency-focused initiatives. And you'll see that we are currently not reaching either of our targets, right? So let's take a look at the initiatives that we have in place. So we have a transition away from road transportation, about 35%, and an increase in rail freight of about 35%. But we are not currently meeting our targets. So what if we get a little bit more dramatic with our transition away from road and increase our rail significantly? That does, in fact, get us to our 2030 target. And this is what we would describe as a substitution. Effectively, you're taking one thing that you do today and replacing it for a lower emission alternative. Now, let's look at efficiency. So the example I would give is a mobile combustion focused efficiency improvement, where by 2029, I anticipate that I can, through route optimization, reduce the kilometers driven and ultimately the fuel used by my fossil fuel vehicles. So I've modeled that in already. 2029 is the initiative year. And I see that if I want to achieve that 15% reduction, that the absolute limit to my consumption of diesel in my passenger vehicles is 75,000 liters as opposed to the original 89,000 liters. And if we take a look at the graph, we see that slight decline between 2029 and 2030 is modeled in there. But what about situations where I'm not exactly sure what changes to make? Well, this is where we can use our impact comparison feature. Now, I have preloaded an example here, and we'll get into it in a second. But the basic idea behind this feature is you can, in real time, create comparisons and understand the emission reduction potential of the changes that you are considering. So the baseline example I have is primary PET used in material in product production. So I purchased a lot of virgin PET. In this case, I've input 1,000 kilograms, though that's probably a little bit low for a manufacturing company of any kind. But we'll take the example. So the natural substitution in this regard would be to use recycled PET, right? But right now, I'm not sure what the reduction potential is. So I would choose PET, closed loop recycled, and select this, and input the 1,000 kilograms that I'm using in the primary material. And I see that the reduction potential of making a change similar to this would be approximately 22%. Now, what I've shown you so far is quite heavily focused on reduction levers that you, as an organization, have a high degree of control over. What about those suppliers that you just can't do without? Now, this is when we begin to focus on our value chain and the data that we gather through our value chain engagement module. Now, full transparency, this is still a prototype, but this is the next iteration of what we want to enable with scenarios. So in this regard, we see that our current emissions are significantly higher than our targeted level of reduction. But if I include my known supplier targets, I see that I'm suddenly on track to reach my reduction targets. But what about those situations where you're not 100% confident yet that the suppliers you've engaged will actually reach their targets? So here we go to our engagement effect page, and we can choose to include or exclude specific suppliers. So in this case, I'm going to exclude East Ship and Marzipan and see the impact to my original scenario. Now, I'm slightly above the targeted level of reduction. So I have sort of two decisions to make, or three perhaps. The first would be identifying more reduction initiatives within the realm of my emissions that I have a high degree of decision-making control over. The second could be to work directly with Marzipan and East Ship to ensure they reach their targets, and I can be confident that they will do so. And the third, maybe the worst case scenario, is to have to change to new suppliers that have more ambitious climate goals or are deemed to be more reliable when it comes to their emission reduction trajectory. So these are the ways that we're supporting our customers with planning reduction today, and I'm excited to say there are a number more exciting features in the reduction space that are going to support our customers with taking reduction from the planning phase to the action phase that are going to come out over the next couple of months. Thank you, Sarah.
Wow, so it's really amazing to see how a platform can be a pivotal partner in supporting an organization in their journey to net zero. Thank you, Tristan. And I mean, there are people on our team that haven't even seen those features before, so you guys are truly getting the first look. It's been a lot of information today, so let's wrap it up in some key takeaways. At the top of the session, you heard about the imperatives for action that include mounting regulatory pressures, consumer demand, and climate change mitigation. Delphine took us into the strategic action steps of breaking down how to do reduction, which includes getting a comprehensive carbon baseline, setting well-informed science-based targets, which will be the focus of our next webinar, and implementing those strategic emissions reduction initiatives. NORCAN gave us a little walkthrough on how they are implementing reduction initiatives and positioning themselves as an industry leader by doing this. And Tristan wrapped it up by showing how utilizing our normative carbon accounting platform and climate strategists to effectively plan, implement, and monitor reduction efforts. So if you are interested in hearing more about how we at Normative can help you wherever you are in your net zero journey, simply fill out the form and we'll be in contact. And like I promised you, we have about 12 minutes left of the session where you're going to be able to pick the brains of our panel here. So we had Tristan, the product manager here at Normative, Delphine with her vast experience in climate strategy with different organizations, and Gregor, who's doing and implementing these types of initiatives within his organization. So please use the Q&A section. We'll take them running. If we don't get to your question, we'll follow up via email. So let's jump in. I know we have a question if all the speakers. So we've got the first question that we'll be tackling today is, when 99% of GHG emissions are from scope 3, where you have limited control over sub-suppliers in tier 2 and 3, what are the best practices of data collection? And I think, Delphine, you have some unique insight into this as helping some customers with our Engage workshop.
Yeah, and first, this is a really good question. I mean, it's always hard to go down the chain and to reach different levels of and tiers of suppliers. Now, when I was presenting, I talked about the importance of setting up long partnerships with your suppliers. And of course, usually, especially if you have a complex value chain, you mostly have visibility on direct suppliers, so tier 1 suppliers, tier 1 manufacturers, for example. And this is where establishing long-term relationships with those suppliers that you have direct contact with and making sure that they are on the right journey, that they've developed their mitigation plans or they are developing their mitigation plans, means that engaging with those tier 1 suppliers will allow you to know that these tier 1 suppliers also have to engage with their tiers of suppliers, right? So the chain continues down the various tiers. So if you engage properly with your tier 1 suppliers and push for them to put in the right actions, then the reality of how carbon accounting is done within Scope 3 is that that's power and that's impact trickles down the chain. Of course, if you have more information about other tiers of suppliers, it's always great that you can still engage with them and collect information about where they are in their journey, what are their plans, and how they're mitigating their impact.
Great answer. And I know Michelle shared in the chat our VCE guide. So that's a guide we here at Normative have created on how to get started on value chain engagement. So I've got another question. And be mindful if they're in the chat, please put them here. But yeah, so we've got another question about the value chain engagement and suppliers, specifically suppliers. And it's, how does the normative platform work with suppliers? Can we share a link to ask suppliers to input existing targets? And how do we reflect proportional emissions based on sales with the supplier? Tristan, as our product expert.
I can take that.
Yeah.
Cool. So Rachel, you have, I saw your question in the question section. You hit the nail on the head. The basic idea is you are sharing a survey with your suppliers, and they can input their current emissions, their mitigation measures, their targets. And now I wasn't involved in the team who worked on the Engage module and are building the wider carbon network vision, but our general experience and feedback from the suppliers who are engaged is that this is one of the most intuitive and simple sort of value chain engagement tools that they have encountered. So it's a really intuitive system for them to use. Then, sort of once they have responded, they have the opportunity to decide whether they want to become network accounts. And eventually that network data, or becoming a network account, means that that data is shared to the carbon network, and with the sort of permission of those companies could be used to answer other surveys. So there wouldn't be this continuous process of being engaged and getting the same survey links to fill in time and time again. And once we have got that data in, we make use of it effectively. So if we suppliers or customers are setting targets, we will factor that in, or enable our customers to factor that in to their emission reduction modeling. Back to you, Sarah.
Great answer. And like I said, that value chain engagement guide go into it, but a platform is a pivotal partner where you can take all the expertise that Normative has on building features that make this easier for everybody. Go back to the questions box. We had a question on regards to, got a lot of good questions. Okay, so about the investment of purchasing electric vehicles or a green electric source should be huge. So how is the ROI on this investment, and how do you measure this? I know this is a complex topic and therefore a complex answer. So if any of our panel want to speak on it from how they're doing that at NORCAN or Delphine, how you would look at the different factors of reduction initiatives to decide whether to implement something like this in a company's reduction strategy.
Yeah, I mean, calculating return on investment for electric vehicles requires a lot of different factors. So this is where you would look at some of the factors that I mentioned in my parts of the presentation. Of course, this would be applied more concretely to the purchase of electric vehicles. So here you'd need to look more into the cost of electricity in your area, several factors about how many miles you drive and where you drive, and of course the cost of ownership of an electric car versus a gasoline powered car, or depending on the type of vehicles that you have, and that could be looked at over different periods of time as well. And the cost of ownership includes the cost of the initial price, but also potentially repair costs and long term. In the end, when you look at an electric vehicle versus a fuel vehicle, the initial purchase due to electric batteries and so forth might be potentially higher, but of course the cost of fuel over the time that you run the vehicle is usually higher to that of the electricity for the electric vehicle. But Of course, that's very location dependent as well, depending on the electricity that you consume. So there's many, many factors that you'd have to kind of take into account when you're looking at that to estimate the return on investment. I don't know if Tristan, you have something you'd like to add.
Yeah, I would like to add to that, and maybe like referencing some of the work or conversations I've had with Gregos actually in the past about the fact that investments of these nature are going to become table stakes or bread and butter for corporations. When you think about the customers that Norican has, they are large auto manufacturers, as Gregos mentioned, and these are organizations that have high consumer pressure, right? And they are expecting their value chains to get in line, committing to targets, planning reduction, and investing the money in the transition towards emission reduction. So while we might not yet be able to say this $1 invested in X, Y, and Z returned a certain amount of value, right? But we are able to say that the expectation is growing from the bottom of those value chains upwards. And at some point, these organizations that are with very, very long supply chains will turn around and say, we actually just can't do this business with you anymore because you are not on track in the same way that we are. Yeah, that is my addition.
Yeah, and we've been hearing more and more from the supplier side that they're being asked for this kind of information when it comes to RFPs or from their customers. So it is a trend that we're seeing that's only growing. And I think along the same lines of suppliers, we're getting a lot of questions about supply chain today. We have a question from Tim. It says, how do you at Normative take data quality in the plans of suppliers into account? Is there a way to quantify the certainty of the proposed scenarios? Tristan, I know this is something your team takes very seriously, so maybe you want to give a little bit of insight on how you're building that into the platform.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's two phases. There's the data that we get in from the value chain and the team that is driving this value chain engagement module or tool and the overarching carbon network vision that we're building are taking validation of supplier and customer data very seriously. Now, I can't speak to the exact measures that they put in place, but whenever we are using primary data gathered through the value chain engagement feature, we are using it in a way that aligns with the greenhouse gas protocol, is the first component. And then we are not automatically using any of it. It's opt-in. So now this is at the discretion of climate strategy advisors and their customers to work on which data gathered is reasonable and can be trusted, and which falls a little bit further outside of what is reasonable and tangible. The next component of this is actually using that in emission reduction scenarios, right? The fact is, scenarios as they stand are scenarios. They are fictional, and we are working to ensure that the planning phase is operationalized sort of in the real world, and that sort of planned reduction results in real world emission reduction. But with the inclusion of supplier data, we are not advocating for customers to rest on the laurels of their supply chain, right? Even if your supplier has set a target, we don't necessarily want you to take that as, okay, my job is done. So there is the expectation to continue the relationship to ensure that emission reduction is happening year on year, right? And monitor and evaluate that the value chain that you have created or that you work with is on the same path to towards net zero, as an example, that you are on. So it is explorative, right? We want to support customers with modeling of emission reduction, factoring in the secondary sort of passive reduction potential. But it is an active, continuous process of evaluation and inclusion or exclusion.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I promised you we would get everybody out of here on time. I want to say thank you to all the speakers and to all of the attendees for spending 45 minutes with us this afternoon. Remember to please answer the survey at the end of the webinar so we can continue to deliver top-of-the-line content that you guys want to see. And if you're interested in what we're doing, follow us on LinkedIn. We post the latest product updates, legislation news, all kinds of good stuff. And please fill out the survey and have a great rest of your day. You'll find a recording of this webinar in your inbox.